5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Anastasia, welcome to CamTalks.
Hi, Cam. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being my first guest in many, many years. It really has been a long time since the pandemic, which was when I last had to communicate with people in this way. But obviously, I'm no longer in London at the moment. I'm actually in my childhood bedroom, which you'd never know because I've got this lovely little backdrop up. Where are you in the world right now?
I am in North London. I am dog sitting today, so if you hear interference or, chaos in the background, it is a 40-kilo Labrador called Rocky.
Oh, Rocky, go get Rocky. I don't think we need to see Rocky. Rocky sounds adorable. I hope Rocky comes in at some point. Let
I'm
him know.
Bill.
He is very, very welcome. So North London, obviously. I mean, first of all, why don't we start off by explain a little bit about yourself, and then how we kind of first met.
Sure. So, whenever I introduce myself to anybody, I like to use the phrase that I'm a mental health advocate that doesn't like having any spare time. So I, love the mental health space, workplace well-being, sports and mental health inequalities. They're all things that I care very, very deeply about. And yeah, I don't like having spare time, so I try and get involved with as many mental health related things as possible. So my day job is in workplace wellbeing. I work for a non-profit organisation called MindForward Alliance. I look after their UK programme, and our whole ethos is the idea that businesses have such an important role to play in societal mental health. So the things that businesses can do for people's well-being, their understanding and education around mental health also extends to, not just their employees, but the friends and family of employees, their clients, their customers, their supply chains. So it's a really interesting place to work, very fulfilling. I also sit on 2 advisory panels for the Samaritans, who are the UK's leading suicide prevention
I
charity.
may have heard of them. They are pretty big.
They are pretty big and they do some really incredible work. So I support them on some of their online excellence work, which is all about trying to make the online space as safe as possible, particularly for vulnerable people, and also their external engagements and research committee, which is all about kind of the core outputs that they do and the kind of, learning more about suicide and how we prevent it, which is all really, really interesting and incredible. And I'm also on the board of trustees for a very small fledgling mental health charity called Inspire UK, which is all about providing accessible therapy to people who need it because they might be facing barriers to accessing state provided healthcare, or there might be, other reasons why they would like to go down the route of private therapy, but obviously it's really unaffordable for lots of people. So we subsidize therapy and get people the help that they need. And through all of those things that I do that keep me really busy, I get to meet lots of incredible people, sometimes by chance, sometimes they just land in my inbox and say, hey, I've made an incredible film, let's talk about it. And that's how we were introduced.
Well, thank you very much for the summary. Yeah, I love it because obviously we have made an incredible film, but no one's seen the film yet. When I first started making Sunrise, this film about mental health, I was always like, okay, build it in public, show everyone everything behind the scenes, and then the more and more that you put into making a film, the more you become this like tortured artist that just doesn't want to show anyone a single frame until it's absolutely perfect. But knowing that there's people like you that exist out there who actually work in the real world of mental health, I realized I had to kind of say hello and start putting myself out there. So you have seen a bit of the film. I believe you've seen the trailer, is that right?
I have, and I promise that you have not paid me to say this, but it's
Ah.
incredible. I found it really touching, but in all the right ways. It was very gripping, it was beautiful, and it really did make me think, when do I get to see the whole film? Because I just can't wait. So, congratulations. It was amazing to see, and I feel very privileged to have seen the trailer as well.
Well, thank you very much, Anastasia, because you will be one of the first people to see the film. Because the film is about mental health, we want to make sure that charities and mental health professionals like yourself can be the first people to sort of be part of our focus group. And well, I'm delighted to tell you that we're nearly there. I've actually sort of yesterday just sent what is sort of the final cut. to the sound designers and the people doing the color grading. So yeah, it won't be long before you get to sort of give me your input. And I'm scared. I'm very, very nervous. This project has been like 4 years of my life. And so, although it's time to sort of move on and let it into the real world, it's quite scary, being a piece of artwork. But the reason why I think the artwork is important is because, before I tragically lost three friends to suicide, I hadn't known anybody that had taken their own lives. And, it was just suddenly like in the space of a year or two, I'd suddenly realized that there was this huge pandemic that wasn't called COVID, but that was called, depression and suicide. So, I mean, from your point of view, when was the first time you got involved in mental health? When did you first start seeing that there was a bigger issue here?
Yeah, so I'm in this space, I think, for a number of reasons. I mean, I, don't understand how anyone can think that it's not the right thing to do, right? So if we can prevent people from, experiencing these really, really challenging things and, hopefully obviously also prevent suicides, I think, why wouldn't we do what we can? But I first was sort of introduced to the world of mental health through lived experience. So when I was about 17, I'd say I sort of started to realize I wasn't quite experiencing the world how I thought other people were. And obviously, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We get very good at kind of masking things, but I really just was in quite a dark place and I didn't understand it. And I'm not going to give my age away, but that was longer ago than I care to admit. And, the world has moved on significantly since then. But, I was at school and we didn't talk about mental health at school. And maybe there were some celebrities that spoke about mental health, but it wasn't anyone that I resonated with. And so my points of reference for this, psychological experience I was going through was sort of, the really exaggerated Hollywoodisms around mental health. It was, straight jackets and padded walls. And obviously I was absolutely terrified that that's not, the route I wanted to go down. And at 17 as well, I think you're starting to think about, well, what happens next? What do I do after I finish school? And what does my career mean? And I just thought that if I spoke to anybody about what I was feeling, then, that was the end of my future. So I sat on those experiences for a long time, and mental health is much like physical health. It's not just going to go away. You need to get some professional support and treatment. So obviously, I experienced quite a decline, and while I was at university, I had a really, really difficult time with my mental health, and it just kind of got worse because I wasn't addressing it properly. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to speak to somebody. And that was my first interaction with being given labels for what I was experiencing. So I was about 20 when I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. It's a textbook case because so often it goes, hand in hand with things like depression, which is more intermittent. The anxiety is there all the time. The depression kind of comes and goes. And for a period of time in my early 20s, all of that sort of manifested itself with disordered eating and kind of, challenges with kind of dieting and things like that. So I feel like I've sort of been through an aspect of mental ill health. And, subsequently after that, meeting people who were open about their own experiences and speaking to professionals. I had some really, really lovely people supporting me. I sort of felt empowered to talk about what I'd been through. And, it's incredible because I think when you share an experience, it invites other people to also share what they've been through. So it was a real driver, I think, that when I felt confident in sort of owning, what I have and what I went through, it was just a real sort of kick of, well, I have to help other people that might be going through similar things and that might be facing different barriers to being able to even have that initial step of saying, I'm just not having a good time, and answering that question when someone asks you, how are you? And we all do that thing where we go, oh yeah, I'm fine. That's not really an answer. We know that, 9 times out of 10, that's not the real answer. So yeah, it was really just kind of lived experience was a real prompt to want other people to not feel alone if they're experiencing something similar, but also trying to address lots of the things out there that are contributing, I think, to people having challenges with their mental health. And I think once you get into the space, you suddenly see the research has been there for a long time. There's, an incredibly overwhelming number of people who are experiencing challenges with mental health whether you classify that as somebody with a diagnosable mental illness, or actually just the fact that being human means that you will experience periods of poor mental health, poor well-being. Just like you might catch a cold, you can experience something really challenging that is going to have, a short-term impact that's negative on your mental health. So, yeah, I think as soon as, it was sort of a matrix moment, I chose the right pill, and suddenly my eyes were opened to the fact that actually this is, really, really prolific, and it's mental health is a universal experience. So working in this space isn't just about people who are mentally ill, but it's about, the entire population of the world, and trying to make it a better place in some small way.
Well, you certainly do that. And, I know that for a fact because when we first met in person, I think it was amazing because, you've obviously got a lot of experience talking to people who have maybe struggled to open up and say how they're really feeling. Well, that's kind of the opposite for me. I've never struggled to open up and say how I'm feeling. I've just struggled to find enough people to sit there and listen to me. But when we first met and we had a proper coffee, it felt like I was able to just absolutely just all my baggage just got thrown at you. And I think maybe in the 2 hours that we had spoken, it was kind of by the end, I was like, wow, God, I feel like she knows every single thing about my life. And so I wonder, I mean, in that way, is it about building on communication skills? Is it about trying to give people confidence to share their problems? What's been your experience in sort of getting people to open up? Because you're very good at it.
Thank you. I hope that it felt more like a therapy session rather than, an interrogation. But yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, when you are willing to be vulnerable with people, more often than not, people will reciprocate, and there's never pressure. I don't ever want people to disclose things that they don't want to, but I think that where I've been so vocal, and I think, not just about kind of experiences I've had previously with mental health, I'm quite good at saying to people, I'm not having a good day today, and so I'm not feeling very articulate, or, last week was really challenging, so, I don't feel kind of as on the ball this week. So I think kind of living life, hopefully with that sort of added degree of authenticity, I think draws people into also wanting to reciprocate that. But I hope that it's because it creates this idea of safety. I think, when I speak to people, if they choose to disclose things, I want them to feel safe that, they're disclosing it because I'm happy to listen, and if that's what they want to share. And it's not about fixing people's problems. More often than not, we share things with people not because we want them to give us a solution, but because we just want somebody to listen, and to validate the experiences that we've had. So um, I think it's a bit of that, but I'm a big feeler. I really feel for other people. So I don't know if that also sort of, in some way means that people feel more comfortable kind of, disclosing and talking to me about things. But my professional background is in human resources, and a lot of that is sort of, I suppose, the psychology of interacting with people, and providing confidential and safe spaces for them to go through the people processes that are involved in being part of a business. And I think that probably kind of generally you see that in that line of work, you have people that will either through being in that space acquire the skills that kind of, enable them to in a sort of, I hope, comforting way. But also it probably just attracts people that naturally are, empathetic, and have a degree of emotional intelligence as well.
I was so comfortable talking to you that I think I ordered a Belgian waffle with just a load of chocolate sauce, and I didn't hide the way that I wanted to eat it. I was just shoveling that in my mouth, and I was just like covered in chocolate. And I remember at the end of it thinking, not only have I just unloaded all of my problems onto this poor girl who wanted to listen, but then I've also come away just absolutely covered in chocolate, and I didn't feel judged at all. Thank you.
Cam, while I was watching you eat that, I thought I made a real mistake with my own order, with my pathetic fruit salad. All I could think is that looks like the best waffle I've ever seen. I also want one. So, again, you living your life authentically made me want to live my life authentically. So next time I'll be having a waffle.
Sounds good. That sounds really good. Well, see, that's the interesting thing is I feel like, your the way that you were able to communicate with me unlocked, so much confidence in me to sort of like express myself. And I think that's what it's about, really, is about like creating that. I mean, I don't want to use the word safe spaces because, I think sometimes when people try and safeguard a conversation, it can be it's like a bit formulaic. It's like, let me just tell you now how this whole conversation is going to go down so that you don't feel like you're under any pressure. And it's like, in a way, that's kind of the worst thing because then you're like, oh God, is there rules to this? Whereas I feel like when you're able to just, ask people questions and allow them to open up and run with what they're saying, you do end up digging deeper and deeper into to what someone's about. And my experience in mental health kind of started through unfortunately sort of losing friends, but then my own lived experience going through the making of this film has been really difficult. I mean, when I lost my ex-partner Sarah, and I had to go to her funeral, and I had to see her family, and I had to sort of come to terms with the random coincidence that I'm making a film about mental health, and then somebody that I'd loved for 4 years had taken their own life. And that I was probably one of the only people that could have done something about it. Not that I don't blame myself, but when you're sleeping in the studio where we're filming this film and you're the only one there for weeks on end, your mind starts going to places that isn't quite comfortable anymore, and you start having these thoughts and these intrusive sort of feelings about how much doubt I have for myself, and that's not who I am. But that's kind of what I've gone through, and through the sort of fatigue of not eating very well, of trying to produce a film with next to no money, and spending sort of countless nights trying to recall the memories of someone that I loved. I found myself in a position where I was particularly vulnerable. And, I'm actually very thankful because I have a lot of very good friends. I'm at the center of a network of incredible people. And I was actually offered the opportunity to go to a retreat in Scotland, where, I'd learn a lot more about myself through being with, a group of people who are trying to open up and trying to, that's why we were there. So for 5 days, I was able to tell my full story on repeat, to a group of very interesting people. We even got to go and pray with some monks in a monastery, and it's like that level of personal development is never normally given to people, and it's certainly not something that I would have been able to afford myself. It was a gift. But with that gift, I learned about sort of the skills of patience and listening, and I learned about the idea of sort of digging deeper into people's past, by really trying to establish that timeline from zero to now, and figuring out, well, what happened in your formative years? What was those experiences that mean that you're sat here right now not having the confidence to open up? And I think the ability to dig deep, so instead of playing, table tennis with a conversation, which is great, and what we normally do to sort of establish communication, there's this sort of theory I think that I've come away with, which is that instead of it being a two-way thing, just to keep asking questions, what and how questions. So, when someone tells me, oh, they're not feeling too good today, it's well, what is it that makes you not feel so good? How was your morning? How was last week? What are you currently working on in your life? And I've found that through doing that kind of communication with my friends, and just setting myself the challenge of just shut up, Cam. You don't need to talk about yourself, even though you love talking about yourself. You can just ask them questions. And then maybe about half an hour into it, this little exercise, you've just unlocked something in somebody that they've never told someone that, and they've never said this to someone, but now you're on this comfortable level with them that makes them just spill out everything that they can possibly think about because you've given them that safety and that sort of respect and the ability to listen. So, I mean, I experienced that in a crash course, but I imagine that you've been living that reality for many, many years now in the mental health space. But I mean, how do you think your way of communicating has evolved through your experiences?
So I think it's interesting because I think partly what you've described is you've kind of somehow come to the conclusion yourself, which is incredible, obviously through being on this retreat, around actually some of the principles behind what Samaritans do with their listening volunteers. So I know most people are familiar with the Samaritans, but they have helplines which are run by volunteers, and they are a listening service for people that are at a crisis point. And they share some of that learning. So there's actually free training that you can do with the Samaritans around what they call kind of active listening, which is essentially where you are encouraging people to sort of draw out that information. So it's based on this idea that actually quite often in conversations, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the majority of the time, you're not actually listening to what the other person is saying, you're thinking about what you're going to say next. So when you frame it as kind of, you know, those questions and inviting that person to have the sort of freedom to continue that sort of flow of thought and share that with you, I think it, you know, makes for a conversation which can be deeper. So it's really interesting that, you know, you've come to that conclusion, because I think it's definitely, you know, spot on along the lines of what, you know, the amazing professionals in kind of crisis intervention, for example, are recommending. I think from a personal perspective, you know, there are bits of learning that you pick up along the way. I suppose, you know, you don't have to do formal training, just from the interactions that you have with people in the mental health space, and the way that you can see, you know, if you interact in this way, you get this out of a person. If you interact in another way, you get something else out of a person. So I think it's been just sort of a journey of having the privilege of lots of people, you know, coming to me and feeling able to share things, and understanding how, you know, the way that I respond might kind of navigate the way that they are able to kind of continue sharing some of that information. But I think, interestingly, you know, if I think about my personal development to get to this stage where hopefully, you know, people feel that they can kind of speak to me in that sort of supportive way, um, I think that you know, obviously we're very formed by the experiences that happen in our lives, and I was an only child for a really, really long time. So I've got an enormous age gap with my brother and sister. So I'm 16 years older than my brother, 20 years older than my sister. She told me recently that when I'm 40, she's going to be 20, and that really sent me into a thought spiral that I didn't really want to go down. So I'm not going to go down that route. But I think that the transition of being at that age and having that sort of dynamic of, it's not your child to look after, but it's a young presence to be around, and to think about how do you want to shape and help shape their view of the world. And I was already working in kind of, you know, mental health direction, particularly when my sister was born. I think that it gave me a degree of emotional intelligence that really built on something that I hadn't had before. I'm not saying I was a sociopath before that, but, you know, it's just that kind of enhanced understanding of the influence that we can have on people. I think you can learn lots from children and kind of their view of the world. So I think it was a really formative experience for me, which on reflection, I think really has contributed to the way that I am able to empathize with people, but also the way in which, you know, I would like to create those, I know you don't want to call them safe spaces, but, you know, some of that kind of environment where people can interact in that way, where they're able to share the things, and, you know, that they understand the importance of being able to express your emotions. I know it all sounds wishy-washy sometimes, but, you know, lots of it is so rooted in, you know, disciplines like neuroscience and psychology and psychiatry, and that emotional health is so important. So I'm grateful for the experience of becoming a sister later in life, because I think that it probably has helped me get to this stage and enabled me to hopefully help other people as well.
Yeah, it does seem like you know, like learning how to communicate with people is not something that you get done at childhood. You know, maybe the fundamental values that you carry in your life are kind of, you know, very formative, but actually I feel like learning from role models and learning and sort of emulating the way that other people act, that's how I've sort of learned communication in the last few years. And certainly I think, you know, I mean, so the reason why I don't want to call it safe space is to be honest with you, that's talking about an experience where I didn't quite feel safe, even though someone had just told me that this is a safe space. And I'm just like, oh, like, wow, well, that's a crazy way of feeling right now, that I can't even open up to someone that's supposed to be like that. I guess the thing that I'm trying to say is that what am I trying to say? I guess the in recent years, I've seen that there's this hype around mental health, and then there's this, you know, one person will say something, and then suddenly it's a hype against mental health, and suddenly then it's a hype for mental health, and then someone kills themselves, and everyone goes, "Oh, look, actually, they were being serious." And I guess this is the problem with role models, is that actually those role models who are the loudest tend to lead the way in our conversations in society. And you know, in the past, you know, I think my parents' generation haven't been so open to wanting to talk about this kind of stuff, because there is this stiff upper lip and just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But I find that in recent days, we've had a lot of influencers, sort of celebrity psychiatrists in a way, who have really sort of rose to fame, great books that you can read and share with people. And so there is a lot better understanding of the sort of space. How do you feel that the mental health space has changed since the beginning of your career? What has the introduction of digital and social media been like from your point of view?
So I think on the whole, it's been positive in the sense that, as you say, there is more visibility of people being able to talk about, mental health and, various aspects of well-being as well. And they have a platform to be able to kind of engage people in the topic, to drive the importance, to empower people to be able to share. I honestly think that every time somebody shares a story, it gives permission for other people to share their stories as well, which is an important part of getting the support that you need, and people around you understanding, how they can best help you to feel good and to be your best self. So I think on the whole, that kind of, general kind of public awareness and understanding of mental health has improved massively. Even as I said, if I compare it back to when I first started struggling with my mental health when I was, 17 or so, it's just a completely different ball game now. I think that there's a little bit of a risk. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist. So, I have to be cynical sometimes. I think that there is a little bit of a risk. There's a sort of interesting interplay between when we talk about mental health. I think we used to talk about mental health and we used to use it as a synonym for mental illness. And now it's sort of used so interchangeably. And it is slightly different when we're talking about mental illness versus that universal spectrum of mental health that I was talking about. So everyone has mental health. Unless you are the luckiest person in the world, you are likely at some point in your life to experience a period of poor mental health. That's just part of being human. It's part of having emotions, and it's part of having chemicals in our brains that make us feel things and make our body react in certain ways to certain situations. But then, of course, you have a category of people, and the thinking is that it's 1 in 4 in the UK, for example, and that's specifically around mental illness. And I think sometimes the discourse is so, full of people with lived experience, but not necessarily, I suppose, the professional credentials to talk about things more in the psychiatry space, that sometimes it can be a bit counterproductive. And I think that there's still some way to go around certain kind of mental illnesses. So anxiety, depression feel like they're easier to talk about, they're easier to understand, we know more about them, people might feel more comfortable to disclose it. When we talk about things like personality disorders, even bipolar, when we talk about schizoaffective disorders, there's still a lot of kind of stigma and misunderstanding. And so I think that when we talk about this boom and well-being, sometimes it leaves behind actually people who are particularly vulnerable, and who are particularly misunderstood in society, and they have challenges in kind of accessing the support and care that they need. So I think I would just urge kind of anybody that's working in the mental health space and that is sharing their lived experience, which is so valuable. You can be an expert by lived experience, but I think it's just caution around, what we experience as individuals going through something, unless you are medically certified to say that XYZ is helpful and is definitely going to, cure thing, cure is not the right word, but, is going to be able to support you. There is something about that caution around, it's not necessarily applicable to everybody. And it is still really important that people don't just engage with, well, I've heard a story and I'm going to copy what they've done. It's still important to engage with those kind of frameworks that are in place to protect people when we're talking about it in kind of a more medical sense. But that's my bugbear, and I'm sure that people might disagree with me, but there is something about that mental health versus mental illness, and just being careful that we don't leave people behind that really do need support.
I'm so glad that you said that because I was definitely one of those people who assumed that it was all under the same, problems. And yeah, the difference between mental health and mental illness is that, obviously where there's an illness, it's that it's not as simple as, it's just an off day, and I think if we're going to feel like we're so enlightened because we've seen someone on social media talk about mental illness and then apply that to someone with a serious disorder, then we're gonna sort of try and expect, a fish to climb a tree, you know, and you really can't look at everyone in that same way. My experience with this is the fact that yes, you know, I've gone through a certain you know, experience, but then when I've met people with other experiences, I've read books about other people's experiences, I think that's not mental health. I'm like, that's at least that's not the mental health that I'm experiencing. That is a physical illness, and there's so many of them. And in fact, my mum used to be a nurse in I guess, I mean, they don't call them asylums anymore, but you know, in a place where, you know, she saw people with serious mental illnesses. She told me a story one day of, you know, somebody biting the head off a budgie, you know, and you do think about this, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you know, you think about those, that way of being, and you do say, well, actually, that is not what the majority of people struggling with mental health are like. And so it's very important to make those distinctions between what is a serious illness and what isn't. And I think that's why I love talking to you and being able to you know, bring these conversations to people, because part of this video series that I'm doing to sort of support the film Sunrise is about connecting with mental health professionals. And we actually have some people from the NHS that we're talking to as well, who hopefully will tell us a bit more about the like specific illnesses that we could possibly, you know, see. And I guess on that note, it's you know, the one thing that I was always sort of growing up with, because I was in the army cadets when I was young, so I was like, I always grew up with this kind of like toughness and this sort of like just get over it type of thing. And I still have a lot of tough love from the people in my life. So the question I have is that, you know, if a lot of mental health issues, not illnesses, but the issues that we have can be overcome with a bit of positivity and sort of just get up and do it. What would you say the quickest and easiest things that people can do if they are feeling really low? They're feeling like, you know what, today's not the day. I'm going to stay in bed all day, or you know, I'm not up for doing it, or my life is in pieces. Um, I know there's no quick fixes, but what would be your advice to someone that just wants to sort of pull the handbrake on what is probably, you know, them going at 100 miles an hour down a hill?
Yeah. So just before I answer, I do want to be clear that every mental health issue is valid. So even if somebody's not diagnosed with something, it doesn't mean that, you know, what they're going through isn't valid or real. It absolutely is. And, you know, my encouragement always is that the minute that you think that you might need help, just go and ask for it, because, you know, you can't wait until it's, you know, absolutely critical. There's no such thing as not being unwell enough to seek mental health support. But you know, it's interesting what you say about sort of tough love and your background and kind of army cadets, because what it makes me think about is that what we know, and particularly kind of, you know, bringing it back to some of the themes in Sunrise, what we know unfortunately is that men of a certain age are in a risk category for suicide. And, you know, very often they are men who have never interacted with mental health services. So it's not that somebody has had sort of an ongoing issue that they've been trying to address. It's, you know, often it can be really sudden and unexpected, which obviously is an absolute tragedy and incredibly difficult for people to cope with if they are bereaved in that way. So I think that, you know, the concept of tough love, I think, doesn't always work. I would always advocate for kindness. So if you are having one of those days and you just think, I can't carry on, you don't have to be at crisis point, but it's when you can kind of feel yourself tipping, as you say, kind of, you know, down the hill. I think that kindness is important. And again, I know that lots of people listening to this will be like, that's so wishy-washy, that's so fluffy. What do you mean kindness? But I think it's just something about understanding yourself, understanding that we are just absolutely not built to be going 110 miles every day, all the time. Societal expectations of us are through the roof and they're not realistic. And you know, we have to be really vocal about understanding that. So there's something about understanding yourself and knowing yourself well enough that, you know, I'm not feeling great. What is it for me as an individual that would work really well? So I have a friend and he's a fantastic runner and he says it's really great for his mental health. But I personally can't stand running. So, you know, that wouldn't work for me if I was having an off day. So it's about finding what is that specific thing that works for you. But I also think, and my sort of call to action for kind of anybody listening to this or watching this is to have a think about the fact that I think that we do have a responsibility for one another. So support networks and the communities that we create, even if it's just the community of your little family or you and a couple of friends, there's such an importance of being able to spot the signs when somebody they're just not themselves, and you might get an inkling that maybe it's because they're not having a great time, and being able to support them with the things that, if they're having a day in bed and that day in bed isn't helping them and they are kind of, hurtling into the abyss, sometimes it's really hard to do something for yourself, and it's about somebody helping to pull you out of that. So somebody spotting it, being like, you can stay in bed if you want to, but I am proposing that, we're going to go for a walk together, or we're going to grab Rocky and we're going to go and get muddy in the woods, or, I'm going to take you away for a weekend, or I'm just going to give you a call and we're just going to have a chat, or we're going to go and watch the football, whatever it might be. It can be small, it can be big, but I think that there is something about, you know, sometimes we don't even recognize in ourselves when we are going down that hill, because you're plodding along and it's life and it's one thing after the next. And there is such a power in being able to just have somebody to reframe that for you and just pull you out of that thinking with something small or large. And I'd really just advocate for that sort of, however small or large your support network is, we can do a lot for each other. And I think that's important to remember too.
I'm so glad that you said that. That is one of the best pieces of advice because it applies to everybody, not even if you're the one struggling. And I think that kindness and compassion is often forgotten about when we live in this world of the zeitgeist, where we inhabit the values of the current media landscape, or what people are currently saying is trending. And I guess this is why, I mean, it doesn't sound wishy-washy to me. I think people would probably describe it as woke. And I think that's the least woken thing is to not be able to empathize with someone and understand what they're going through. It reminds me of a really good quote, which is seek first to understand before being understood. And that's what I came away from this retreat, knowing about everything in this life. It's like I don't know anything, and if I'm not ready to try and understand it, then I will never understand it. And or I'll never be understood when it comes to me saying things. And now it's funny because I talk to people and they instantly tell me their point of view, and I think, oh God, that's interesting. You didn't even ask me a single question about the problem that I'm telling you about, but you have a solution. And so to be able to promote empathy and kindness, I think it's amazing. So thank you for doing that, all within your wonderful pink self. It's like you've really inhabited the values of Barbie.
Yes, I'm trying.
I'm not trying to misgender anyone, but like I think there is a feminine love that men very often just decide to just not have, and they don't understand each other. And unfortunately, as you said, male suicide is huge. And so, at the end of the day, we're not in this situation of war right now. So stop acting like it. That's the way that I tell my friends. We get, listen, we could chat for ages and we could probably have a few Belgian waffles or two. But I think I'd like to be able to sort of wrap up by talking a little bit about Inspire, talking about some of the smaller community stuff or some of the smaller charity stuff that you do. Because I know Samaritans is out there, they're very big. They've got their own problems, I'm sure, but from the smaller charities, what is the challenge around Inspire, and how can we as the public get behind you?
So, I think in the current economic climate, it's probably no surprise that for lots of charities, big and small, one of the big barriers at the moment is funding. So, as obviously people are struggling with their own cost of living challenges, the fundraising element of charity is becoming increasingly difficult, and charities are trying to be creative in the ways that they are seeking support from people. So, if anyone has a couple of spare pounds, particularly for small charities like Inspire, it really, really goes, a very long way in terms of being able to sustain what we're able to do. But I'm also a big advocate for, charity support doesn't have to be just through fundraising. So if you're not able to give money, we completely understand. There's no pressure ever on anybody. But there are things like, if you've got some skills that you'd like to donate to a small charity, whether it's to us at Inspire, we obviously would be incredibly grateful, or, local charities charities, small charities that mean a lot to you, that might be doing something specifically in your area. You know, it's donation of skills and time is also really important. So, you know, are you good at making websites? Could you support a small charity and making theirs a little bit more, you know, attractive, so that they can attract some more funding, or so that they can, you know, create an easier journey for their end users, for the people that they're on the front line of supporting? Are you very good at finances? Could you help a charity get their affairs in order? Because often charities, especially small ones, are made up of some really, really passionate people that care deeply about the cause, but, you know, not necessarily having the skills, or, you know, they're in the learning process of kind of adopting and building on some of the skills that really will help the charity to thrive in a sustained way. So, you know, if you can spare some money, it's always really important for charities, but also it's just that support through any, you know, even if it's just an hour, providing some insights into whatever you're good at, is incredibly valuable for charities. And it will make you feel good as well. We know that there is a scientifically proven link between supporting charitable initiatives and our own well-being. So it's a win-win. Why wouldn't you do it?
Hey, it's not just science. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's the you know, above this self-actualization, above this idea that, you know, once you've got everything in your life sorted, you understand yourself. Above all of that is the idea of self-transcendence, is the Dalai Lama, is the giving back to society. And it's almost frustrating when I see incredibly competent, powerful people ignore the fundamental aspects of giving back to people. And I found that, you know, a lot with Sunrise and making this film, a lot of rejection. And that's fine. I don't mind being rejected. But sometimes you look at someone who has absolutely everything and you think, well, you haven't got everything because you don't know what it feels like to actually to be, you know, fundamentally useful to somebody that needs your support. So shut up, everybody out there, and give them your money and give them your time, drop them an email, do something, you know, every day that just is maybe a little bit against the curve, a little bit against, you know, what you think selfishly, and try and create these connections, because this is a connection. You know, I have to say, like, in sort of some of my lowest points, you know, making this film, I've suddenly got an email from yourself introducing me to somebody who's opening doors for me, and suddenly I think, oh my God, there is compassion out there, there is kindness, there is random you know, moments that are going to take me from I can't be bothered to get out of bed today to, oh my God, I'm up and at 'em because I feel like I've got people who care about me. So thank you for practicing what you preach, because I think it's role models like yourself that do this, that sort of cause that snowballing effect, and hopefully a lot more people can just give a bit of time and even a bit of money. Like, you know, what is a cup of coffee? A pound, £2. You know, I find myself doing this more and more now with friends who put projects online, because obviously having raised just over £10,000 on Kickstarter for Sunrise, I know what it feels like when someone needs a little bit of help. And you know, sometimes I get to that payment page and it's like, oh, I'll just give them £5, and then I go, whoops, and I accidentally press £20, and I'm like, I know I can't afford that right now, but I'm also like happy that I did it, because I feel in some way that, you know, it does help me become a better person and sort of hopefully spread that love, which I think is what you've taught me. You've taught me the idea of love and kindness and compassion. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad, Cam, that that's what you've taken away, because that's also how I try and live my life, where possible, where possible.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you think that you'd like to mention on this wonderful little podcast that we have?
I don't think anything particularly comes to mind, but just that when Sunrise is out and when you're ready for people to see it and to support it, I just encourage everyone to get on board, because, you know, if the journey and the run up has been, you know, anything to go by, I think it's going to be an incredible and transformative experience for lots of people. So, yeah, watch out for Sunrise. Can't wait.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if anyone wants to know anything about what Anastasia's up to, I'll put all of the links in the bio for this podcast, stuff like that. So go and get in touch with her, go and get in touch with the charity she works for, donate some of your time, because who knows, heaven might be real and you might have to buy yourself a ticket.